the 8th of December 2024, as the Doha Forum was meeting in Qatar, the Assad regime fell suddenly and unexpectedly, and as it did so, the action unfolded in real time at the Doha Forum. I'm Charlotte Leslie, and I'm the director of CMEC, and I'm back at the Doha Forum 363 days later after those momentous events, and what a difference a year makes. This year at the Forum, there are over 5,000 delegates from over 160 countries, and I'm going to be speaking to just a few of those delegates on their thoughts and perspectives on what's been going on in the region over the last year and the trajectory for the future.
I'm Michael Lawrence. I'm the Chief Executive of Asia House. We're a London-based think tank that focuses on commercial, economic and political relationships between Asia and the UK and increasingly the Middle East.
So we're here at the start of the Doha Forum. Normally, in these podcasts, we look at the Middle East through the perspective of the West and look eastwards. Your expertise is further afield. Can you give us an idea of how the Middle East looks from Asia, from your part of the world which you focus on?
We've been tracking what we term the Middle East pivot to Asia since 2017, and that's been looking at trade and commercial links between the two regions and the rate at which they're growing. And it really is quite breathtaking. The amount of trade now between the Gulf countries in particular and Asia is at record levels. It's outstripping trade with the West. This is a phenomenon that we think is actually a significant shift in the world. So the Middle East and Asia are growing in terms of diplomatic links, commercial and economic links, and political links as well. And you can see that continuing. We believe that's going to continue for some time. So we may get to a stage in the near future where the trade between the two regions, despite geopolitical tensions and the impact that's having on business relationships and economic relationships, that's here to stay, and that's a significant shift.
What are the key drivers for that, do you think? Is it the Asia doing exceptionally well? Is it the West not punching at its weight? Combination of the two? What are the drivers?
There's a few of them. First, the need for energy in Asia, especially as China and the emerging markets in ASEAN grows. There's an energy need, but also the diversification of the Middle East countries, the Gulf countries in particular, that are looking away from resources, looking away from fossil fuels to advance their economies. So there's growing ties, for instance, in tech, which is obviously a hot button issue globally, but huge amount of demand there. And it's that diversification which is leading to a diversification of sort of trade that's going on between the two. There's also obviously a very divided world at the moment, and a lot of the countries, both in Asia and this region, are trying to remain neutral as best they can. They're trying to maintain relationships between themselves and the West and the East. Obviously, I'm talking at the center here is China-US, and they're doing so very successfully.
What could the West be doing better to compete for the attention of the Middle East, the Gulf region, against China and its global competitors?
I think the way you look at it, you have to be very, very careful. I don't think the Middle East or Asia, or certainly the Asia excluding China, wants it to be adversarial. They do not want to choose. And I believe that if the West goes in thinking you've got to choose one, that fundamentally undermines the entire premise of what they're trying to do. I think accepting the Middle East, the Gulf countries in particular, want to have multiple relationships across political divides is the first start. An openness to that and an understanding that not every deal has to be seen as this is a pro one side or pro the other side. The Asia-Middle East links geographically helps. The Middle East, obviously, where it's centered, where the Gulf is centered, it's a fantastic trade hub. The growth is coming out of Asia and has been for many years. Our forecasts show that China will grow strongly next year. Most of the ASEAN countries will. India will continue to grow. So you're seeing a growth engine there and therefore demand. So there are things what can the West do? Far be it from me to advise anybody, but it's a complex, multipolar world. And if you go down a path of saying you must choose one side or another, I believe there's some peril in that. Let
me just think of the question. Do you see and I'm not going to ask you to criticise the West here, do you see room for improvement of understanding where the Gulf sits and its own, every country obviously has its right to look after its own sovereign national self-interest. Do you think there's more work we could do from our Western perspective to understand the position of the Gulf countries, of the Middle East, their requirements, their geopolitical position, which may help us in our relationships?
I think there's a massive lack of understanding in the West about the Middle East and Asia. And that the knowledge gap is immense. There's no doubt about it, because there's been a very Western-centric world for decades. Post-war, very Western-centric. And so understanding the culture, the background, is incredibly important, but it takes effort. Too many organizations, governments, people, look at the world through the lens of the West. And that can be very transactional. And that is not necessarily the way the Middle East and Asia work. A lot of it's about relationships. It's about building trust. It takes time. So I do believe there's a lesson there are lessons that can be learned. Being more open to the fact and being more accepting of the fact that there are differences, historical differences. I know, there are Gulf countries, Middle Eastern countries that get huge flack because of their social policies, and I wouldn't, many of them, especially media freedoms, I would not remotely disagree with. But I take Saudi, for instance. The changes in Saudi in the last 5 years socially have been extraordinary and breathtaking. And if you go to Saudi and talk to people in Saudi, they think the pace of change is rapid, and yet you'll hear critics from the West saying they haven't gone nearly far enough. I'm not talking about individual incidents. Horrific incidents happen in all sorts of countries. But the pace of change in the Gulf in particular is the like of which you've probably not experienced anywhere else in the world. And I think there has to be an understanding of that there's deep cultural heritage, there are sometimes very conservative views, and you cannot expect any country simply to adapt or adopt Western values overnight.
We're here at the Doha Forum, which is a fantastic opportunity to be amongst delegates from across the world, particularly the global south. It's notable that Western NATO delegates are not in the majority. What themes are you looking to emerge through this conference? What are the things that you're looking out for?
What strikes me about this conference is that Qatar is taking very, very, very seriously their view as a global mediator. If you looked at the opening session today, it went straight into pictures out of Gaza, very confronting pictures out of Gaza. The call for justice and progress as opposed to talk. It's bold, it really is. And so this is a conference, this is a global political conference, a geopolitical conference, looking at trying to find solutions to some of the thorniest conflicts in the world. I think it's actually rather brave, honestly, because sticking your head above the parapet in such a complex, such a divided and conflict-ridden world at the moment takes some courage. So what strikes me about this is that it's Qatar and this region positioning itself as an independent global mediator for peace in a world that's becoming polarized and more polarized and deeply divided. The participants are interesting. I don't know all of them. It's clearly a big international audience, which is wonderful. But the recognition that it's not just about the West, and the fact that global South, BRICS countries are here, is enormously positive. Again, the region as a whole taking that role as being independent of thought, being able to talk across political lines, being able to position itself as a middle power. And that's what I get the sense here. There's a real feeling of Qatar, of the region, rising as a middle power in an ever more complex and deeply divided world. It's doing so politically, it's doing so economically and commercially, and it's walking that balance between having to take sides and you get a sense here that they're not shying away from the hard questions.
Michael Lawrence, Asia House, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
My name is Baria Alamudddin. I'm Lebanese-British. I'm a writer and journalist.
Baria, we're here at the Doha Forum, and yesterday we were in a session where we were listening to Syria's President al-Shara. What a difference a year makes. This time last year, the Assad regime was falling rapidly and unexpectedly. What did you make of the Syrian president's address yesterday?
Yes, indeed. It's been a difficult year for Syria, but a very important one. I don't think you can compare the rule of Assad with anybody else. Al-Shara is a quite an unknown entity in many ways. Of course, we know about his past. Yesterday, I thought he defended his past very, very well. However, we have to move forward. We need to move forward in this area. As you know, it's surrounded by conflicts. We're lucky to be in Doha, where it's peaceful and beautiful. Nevertheless, I thought he explained the problems frankly, and I thought he came across as somebody who's a good communicator, somebody who explained more or less the challenges. There are huge challenges in Syria, and we should not make them simple because they are huge. I wish they communicate to their people more, because I feel that they talk better to the outside world than to their own people. A lot of the Syrian people are scared. They don't know what the future holds. They don't know where they stand. A lot of Syria is still demolished, destroyed completely, and there is a lot of money and goodwill needed. However, one should not underestimate the role that Israel is playing in Syria. It's definitely undermining the security and the stability, and this free hand for Israel to hit anywhere it wants, anytime it wants, has to stop. We need to regain actually the power of the international law, international institutions like the UN, etc. So I'm hopeful for 2026, and I'm really hopeful that 2026 will bring more of the international institutions back into action, back into being effective in solving the region's problems.
And as we know and as we've seen, what goes on in Syria doesn't stay in Syria. What is the effect and the impact of the changes in Syria to Lebanon, just on its border?
Of course, huge. We in Lebanon, we're directly affected by Syria. Lebanon is this beautiful land surrounded by bad neighbors. We have the sea, we have Israel, and we have Syria. I hope Syria will change to prove to be the very good neighbor that it should be, because we are both Arab countries and neighbors, and there is a lot of people from Lebanon and Syria. There is a lot of intermarriage, a lot of... However, I think that Syrians have to be much more forthcoming with the Lebanese and much more understanding that not every Lebanese is a Hezbollah. The role Hezbollah played in Syria was a very bad role. It was a role that was destructive. The Hezbollah killed many Syrian people. But this is not who Lebanon is. Hezbollah is only a part of Lebanon, and one hopes that Hezbollah will go back to its Lebanese roots and leave any Iranian contact or any Iranian link. So far, many Lebanese feel that Hezbollah represents Iran more than it represents Lebanon, and I think they understand that. And of course, if Syria is stable and secure, again, I repeat the Israeli role, it will be a very, very good and positive thing for Lebanon.
We've discussed Israeli politics and Israel. Of course, as we speak, there is a so-called ceasefire currently in Israel, Palestine, Gaza. What do you make of that? Obviously, there have been significant breaches, and activity in the West Bank is high, if not escalating. Where are we with the ceasefire? Are you optimistic about that?
Unfortunately, I'm not, because I don't see a strategy. I see that, Mr. Trump said to stop the war. Of course it didn't stop. It's much better. Instead of killing hundreds every day, they're killing 25, 30, 40 people every day. So the ceasefire should be dealt with differently. There should be a real clear strategy when it comes to Israel and to the peace process in Israel. Also, what is very worrying is what's happening in the West Bank. The West Bank is an important part of the Palestinian issue. It's where the government seat of government is, and it's on a daily basis. These hooligans, these terrorist settlers, are just roaming the homes and killing people, and not only killing them, destroying their livelihoods and their lives. So this is, again, when I speak about the international law and about every kind of law that you can imagine, the role of the UN UN, the role of the European Union. These have to be, we're tired of words and promises, and action should happen. And one hopes that 2026 will bring much more determination from the international community to stop genocides here and there, to stop also breaching international humanitarian law, to stop this impunity for Israel that it has, what it is doing in the area. Israel is just like any other state. They claim they are a democracy, very far from it. What they should do is go back and be a part of the international community in every way, abide by the rules that everybody else does.
Baria, very finally, we're here at the Doha Forum, and one of the fascinating aspects of this is it brings people together from all over the world, including China, Iran, Russia, Global South in large measure, and we see a very different perspective. To what extent do you think the West's approach to Israel is helpful to China in particular, which we hear beginning to try and seize the mantle of upholding international rule of law and international order to an audience that is quite receptive here amongst the Global South?
Yes, definitely. This is really something. I mean, it looks like as if America is self-destructing itself, which is a very sad thing for people like you and me who believe in democracy, who thought that that America is really where it flourishes, where it is. We are witnessing what's happening in the United States. Unfortunately, it's not standing with the rule of law. It's emboldening those who are like Putin in Ukraine, like Netanyahu in Israel. So I think Russia and China cannot have it in any better way. It seems the American administration is doing this for them and emboldening them. I'm hopeful that the American administration will appreciate and understand how important the rule of law, how important the UN is, and how important it is to the world, to the free world, to the democratic world, to a world that believes in human rights and the rule of law. We miss it. We miss the role, such a role from the United States. Russia and China are having the best of their time, including North Korea, by the way.
Baria, on that note, let's wish for a happy 2026.
Charlotte, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Nicholas Hopton, former British ambassador to Qatar between 2013 and 15. Also, during my diplomatic career, I was the British ambassador to Yemen and to Iran and Libya, and I now run the Middle East Association.
So we're just coming to the end of the Doha Forum. It's been a big forum, I think about over 5,000 people in 160 countries. What are your main takeaways from the last couple of days?
I think it's been a strong contrast with last year's Doha Forum, when there was the landmark events taking place in Syria as delegates met here in Doha. And suddenly that fall of the Assad regime, which is the anniversary at this point now, of course, came to Doha in the form of the negotiations on how to manage that collapse suddenly became very visible and real in the Doha Forum. You had the Russian foreign minister, the Iranian foreign minister, and the Turkish foreign minister, and others, convened by the Qatari Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed, in the margins of the Doha Forum, and in real time they were managing the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. Now, that drama, that high drama, contrasts very sharply with this Doha Forum, which is not a moment when we are seeing the collapse of a regime or a revolution of any sort, but after a year of dramatic events in the Middle East and some significant fundamental changes in the geopolitics and the security situation. What we've seen at this Doha Forum is a series of crossroad moments rather than watershed moments. So, for example, Gaza is clearly at a crossroads now that a ceasefire has been achieved, and the Qataris, among with others, deserve a huge amount of credit for the mediation and the diplomacy that they have brought to that ceasefire, which of course ultimately required the intervention of the US president. But it's also a crossroads moment in the US's relationship with Iran. Are negotiations on the nuclear situation, Iran's nuclear ambitions, about to restart? And if so, could that lead to a wider agreement, some kind of grand bargain, which people occasionally talk about? The events of this year have led to Iran being in a more fragile position than previously, and there is an opportunity, but it could go either way, and it will require both sides to engage in serious diplomacy to move forward there. Now, there are other crossroads that have been highlighted during these discussions over the weekend. For instance, the situation in Sudan, the situation in Yemen. Both countries at critical moments after terrible conflict, and obviously the Qatari efforts are able to shine a light onto those conflicts and those situations, particularly the Sudanese humanitarian disaster, which deserves far more of the world's attention than it's getting. And the Doha Forum doesn't just deal with the region, so it was noteworthy and valuable that Latin America got quite a lot of attention at this forum. And there is clearly a bit of a crossroads moment happening there with what with the build-up of US military force and a large amount of its fleet off the coast of Venezuela. What's going to happen next there, and what will be the implications for the region? So in many ways this forum has been very different from a year ago, but rather than high drama and a particular historical moment, what we've been witnessing is the bringing together of a lot of different voices and views and actors and players, both political and diplomatic and other, in this forum over an intense few days. And the Qataris do this very well, and the Doha Forum has been a valuable moment to take stock and look at what's going on.
Talking of crossroads, this time last year the Assad regime was falling, and at the Doha Forum we heard from the now president of Syria, al-Shara. What did you make of his speech and contribution, and where do you see Syria going? There are obviously significant concerns, particularly from minorities. Is this the good news story we all want it to be?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, a year ago, al-Shara was moving rapidly into Damascus, and Assad was leaving for Moscow. So the journey travelled in the last 12 months has been remarkable. This Saturday we saw al-Shara now in a suit on a stage being interviewed by Christine Amanpour and giving a very credible performance as a political leader of his country. He spoke about inclusion, he spoke about trying to move the country forward, to make sure that the conflict stopped, to find some solution to the ongoing violent conflict with Israel in parts of the country. And to all intents and purposes, he was reassuring to the audience, which included a large number of Western politicians and diplomats, that under his leadership, Syria was going in the right direction. Now, the challenges, as you mentioned, are still immense. And it is high time that the Syrian people saw the benefits of this political shift in their country. And it is encouraging that we seem on the point of having the Caesar sanctions lifted, which will allow the country to be able to engage economically and commercially in much more normal ways, and this should bring benefits to the Syrian people. But the challenges shouldn't be underestimated. Syria is still very fragile, and it will need all the assistance of the international community, not just the United States, but countries in Europe, such as the United Kingdom, to help move Syria onto a more solid footing for the benefit of its people, but also to bring stability to the region.
Nicholas Hopton, Director of the Middle East Association, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Alicia Kearns, Member of Parliament for Rutland and Stamford.
Alicia, you're also Shadow National Security spokesperson, and you were formerly Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which is an important role in Parliament. We're here at the Doha Forum. Can you tell me a bit about how your work on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee resonates, and why these kind of gatherings, like this one here in Doha, are important?
The Doha Forum in particular is important because you hear voices that you wouldn't hear otherwise. So, look, we love to say we have a diverse ecosystem of foreign policy discussions in the UK, but realistically, when you come to places like Doha, you do hear people speaking you wouldn't before. Everyone who comes here has got their own expertise and their own right to be here. I particularly enjoy being able to do bilaterals. So, for example, today I had a little chat with the Turkish Foreign Secretary. I had a chat with the Bosnian Foreign Secretary. But also a lot of the work that I'm doing specifically while I'm here is all around hostage negotiations. So British nationals that are being held hostage around the world. The Qataris, look, if I was taken hostage, if I was arbitrarily detained, it's the Qataris that I would want to be involved to help in my case. And they've been so useful and important in getting so many people out. So not only is it important in terms of hearing those voices, being here with people who are experts who have a different perspective, but actually you can get business done as well.
Sitting on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and indeed chairing it, you have kind of split locations of focus. You have a constituency, you have UK Parliament, which is very absorbing, but also none of that takes place in a vacuum. It's part of turbulent global affairs. How do you balance that, and do you think that UK politics in general has sufficient focus on global affairs and foreign affairs?
I think there's been an enormous shift. So when I was elected in 2019, a lot of my colleagues who'd just been elected me went, well, you can do all that focus on foreign policy because you've got what's considered a safer seat. It's always been a Conservative seat. You can be distracted by those things that you think are fun and interesting. And I was really shocked by that opinion because I said to them, as you said, we don't operate in a vacuum. The UK cannot be economically where we want to be if there are crises around the world. And then we had the pandemic, where I think that brought into sharp relief for many people the importance of that global ecosystem. And then obviously we had the renewed illegal invasion of Ukraine. Since then we've had the Gaza crisis. And I think it made many people who come into politics thinking that foreign affairs is just for those of us who are more academic or, worldly, that actually every single member of parliament should have the security of the UK as the number one priority. Because I guess I disagree with some of my colleagues on this, but you cannot have economic security unless you have national security. And many people like to suggest it's the other way around, but it's just not.
We're coming to the end of the first day of the conference. What meetings have you been in, apart from the bilaterals, that have most stood out to you, and what are you looking forward to tomorrow?
So a bit of a personal one really, but I really enjoyed hearing the Syrian president speak. I spent 2.5 years of my career working on Syria when I was at the Foreign Office, at the peace talks, negotiating, and of course he wasn't part of that. Obviously he was part of a proscribed terrorist group at the time that we definitely didn't have any truck with. And it's really fascinating seeing him now have that opportunity to set out his vision for Syria. What does that mean? Christiane Amanpour obviously doing a phenomenal job questioning him. So I really enjoyed that just because once you've worked on an issue, it's very hard for you to ever lose it from your heart. So that for me was probably the most interesting.
And what about tomorrow? Have you got anything lined up that you're particularly looking forward to, or questions that you really want to find asked or answered that haven't been covered today?
I'm going to wait and see what comes to me, but actually for me, the joy of the Doha Forum specifically is I always end up having conversations with people I never thought to. And so although I've got my scheduled bilaterals, I'll go and sit in the halls and listen, you always end up being introduced to some really interesting people. Let's see what the day brings.
Alicia, thank you very much indeed.